because we are all equal people.
It's equal rights for all in America.
I'm super happy about it. I think that it's a huge step for the gay community.
It's a big deal to have the federal government say that your marriage needs to be equal and recognized the same as everyone else's.
I think it's an amazing step forward for America, and it makes me very proud to be an American.
And that's just a sampling from coast to coast, and what's been a very emotional last 24 hours celebration for same-sex couples and their supporters across the country. Now, exuberance marking yesterday's really momentous Supreme Court ruling when it came to the issue. And for more, very pleased to bring on our next guest, Lisa Linsky. Lisa's a partner in McDermott, Will and Emery, also a partner in charge of the firm's LGBT Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and an officer of the board of Lambda Legal, and also formerly, for those local folks, in the Westchester DA's office as well back in the day. Okay, first of all, as best you can, for folks who just read the report or read the holding of it, the majority of dissenting opinions, but couldn't put a human face on it, talk about you personally, but also put in human terms some of your clients on how their lives got changed by what happened yesterday in Washington.
Sure. Well, of course, there were two decisions that the Supreme Court handed down yesterday, one in the DOMA case, or the Windsor case, dealing with federal DOMA, and the other in the Prop 8 case, or the Perry case out of California. The rulings are different, and yet they are in some ways interconnected. Let's talk about DOMA. DOMA requires the federal government to recognize the marriages of same-sex couples wherever they may be validly entered. So, if they're validly entered now in one of 13 states in the country, the federal government has to recognize those marriages. If a couple got married in any one of 12 countries outside of the United States, and they were validly married, the federal government has to recognize this. What people have to understand, though, is that the DOMA case, the Windsor case, dealt with federal recognition and benefits. It didn't deal with a right to marry. The Perry case really focused more on that issue of the right to marry, and frankly, the Supreme Court punted on that one because, as you know, they decided the Perry case on procedural or standing grounds.
You know, we covered this yesterday, but I'm glad you reiterated it, because after the show, in just conversational with people, everybody had a different perspective on what the reality was of yesterday. And I thought the Times gave a couple of examples. I'll give one here, and then you can extrapolate that on really how, while it's a victory, an unqualified one for gay marriage, it also further muddies some of the realities and the logistics. So this, again, was just a portion of what they said. Here's one example they referenced. Consider two women living at an Air Force base in Mississippi. They travel to Maine, they get married. When they get back to the base, the military now recognizes their marriage, affording them a variety of benefits that will go to any married couple, like health care, housing allowance, etc. But once they exit the gates of that base, they will find their marriage license means nothing in the state of Mississippi, where couples can adopt kids and employers, they can fire you just because you are gay. And you can find example after example about this. That is still this unresolved terrain still after yesterday, right?
Absolutely correct, Richard. And what folks have to understand is that DOMA had two provisions. One was Section 3, which the Supreme Court struck as unconstitutional yesterday in its decision. But what remains on the books, at least as of this moment, is Section 2. Section 2 of DOMA carves out an exception to full faith and credit. So whereas if an opposite-sex couple got married in the state of New York and they traveled to the state of Mississippi and perhaps decided to live in Mississippi, Mississippi would recognize that marriage under the doctrine of full faith and credit. Not so for same-sex couples. And that is a direct result of Section 2 of DOMA, which allows this exemption. So you see, the decision yesterday, which is historic and is a landmark decision, and let's not in any way negate that. It is a time for celebration for the LGBT community.
Because it says equality.
It is absolutely a firm stand and a step forward for equality. And it was a long time coming. There has been a lot of advocacy that has gone on by organizations like Lambda Legal and the ACLU and so many others to get us to this point in our history. But it's still,
as you would say, not only unfinished, but we're talking 13 states. People can do the math. There are 37 here that still have to figure this out. And in the meantime, all that hodgepodge. Now, one of the things, Jeannie, that I really thought after this was just look at this week, guys. In this week, the same court, 24 hours earlier, said the Voting Rights Act, not so much, okay? They're going to use basically different times, different ages. We all heard the debates. We did it on this very show. We see what happens in Texas. We're going to talk about that in a segment later, about how the rights as it relates to choice are facing additional restrictions. And then you have an issue we've talked about, gun control, for example, where even after Newtown, little if anything has really changed in this country beyond all the rhetoric and the back and the forth. Jeannie, why has the issue of gay marriage, do you think, moved with such velocity that if people go into his office and they say, I want to get elected, where it would have been like, well, you got to be against gay marriage. Now you got to think about where you are in the country. I mean, it's unbelievable how fast it changed. Well, all those other issues are they're either stuck in the mud or even going in reverse. Why do you think?
It is a historic change when you look at it. I mean, you think 20 years ago, so fast. And I agree with you. It is perplexing as to how it's changed so fast. I think there's a few theories out there. One of them is that the LGBT community did a very, very good job of making the case and advocating on behalf of their rights. And they did it in terms of their right to be equal under the law. And that is something that when you talk to Americans left, right, or center, they get that. Whether you support, you are gay yourself or not, they get the idea of equality. So I think the LGBT community deserves a lot of credit for that. I think it's also, and I'm in a college, young people, you talk to them about this issue, whether they are conservative.
We have a very
conservative campus because we are a Catholic college. Young people, conservatives, don't understand this issue. They don't see what the big deal is. When it was passing in New York State, their eyes rolled over. Of course it's going to pass.
There was a high school coach not far from yours in Yonkers.
I heard about this,
who came out after this, and his team looked at him and they said, okay, can we practice
now?
We
go on?
And it's like a shrug of the shoulders, like, what's the big deal?
Yeah.
And I'm curious, you must have talked to Republicans who've changed their opinions on this.
Well,
why do you think they have?
There's a couple things. First off, you hit the nail on it. It's generational. I think as you go through generations to see what it is, everybody you talk to talks about what their kids think about it compared to what their friends thought about it.
You're
when
right,
they
but I
grew up.
want you to speak to this one thing, Obi.
So,
I know people very close to me who might even consider themselves progressive in other stuff, or at least moderate. But they've done a 180 as it relates to gay marriage. They said, oh, you know what, I'm for civil unions, but not marriage. Now they're like, I don't know why I felt that way. Who cares? I think even a Dick Cheney will have. Is it because they know people? Why do you think conservatives
it's because they know people. I think this goes back to what their fight was and what they did. I think the organizations realized when they lost the election in California, they realized they couldn't go across this country and fight it election by election and risk losing it, because then they have to go to court. So they decided the court was a better way to do it, number one. Number two, I think when they started using the tip of the spear with civil unions, it opened it up. Like Colorado's got a constitutional. In their constitution, gay marriage is unconstitutional in Colorado, but civil unions are okay. So when they get the tip of the spear in, and as you said, people say, "Oh, civil unions or gay marriage," I don't see the difference in it, and then they accept it.
I have to jump in, Obi, and say that I think, as an LGBT advocate and an attorney, I think that part of the answer lies in the fact that there has been tremendous educational efforts to get people to understand why marriage. I've come so far in my own personal journey on this issue. Years ago, someone said to me, well, as long as you can have civil unions, I'm a lesbian. I have a partner of 14 years. Someone said to me, well, if you can have civil unions, is that okay? Years ago, I said, yeah, sure, that should be okay. But now I've come to understand, as so many others have come to understand, why marriage matters. I write a blog for the Huffington Post, and I just published something a couple of weeks ago about this very issue, about the label of marriage and what the M word means. It's important, and people are now getting it. And clearly, if you read Justice Kennedy's decision, the majority decision in the DOMA case, it's compelling, it's moving, it's powerful.
What was your reaction when you heard what Justice Scalia said in the dissenting opinion?
I was very upset. It sounded angry to me. I thought Justice Scalia was fearful, frankly, because he says at one point, we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, meaning it's only a matter of time until the very issue that the court avoided this round, whether or not same-sex couples have a fundamental right to marry, comes back to the Supreme Court. And you know what? Justice Scalia is afraid of that issue. And that makes me very sad.
Do you think, Andrew, can you give me a reasoning why 90% of Americans wanted background checks? I think still do. I haven't seen a more recent poll. But there's no movement on it and no punishment or penalty really if they don't. But if a lawmaker came out and said, depending on the state, they don't want to let same-sex couples marry, even though people are passionate on both subjects, I think that there'd be a penalty for that. I've seen a lot of Republicans, we saw in New York State, I think some courageous stands by state lawmakers in New York, a couple lost their jobs, by the way, as a consequence of it, who came out for it. Why do you think there's political movement or courage on this issue, but there isn't on some of the other issues we've talked about?
Well, I think it's partly the swing in public opinion, which has a lot to do with it, but the public opinion is moving clearly in one direction on same-sex marriage. It's not on guns in the overall. Also, same-sex and gay rights issues are issues where people can relate directly to their friends, to their loved ones. That example's right in front of them, whereas on guns, I think you get both examples that are too often in front of people. People who feel like their safety is being enhanced by gun ownership, and people who feel like their safety is being endangered by gun ownership.
But yet the polls, your number, 90% of people want something and they don't get it.
Well, can I say, I think another huge issue is something that will be mentioned, which is that this is in the courts. If you brought this to the Congress, it would not have come out the same way. And I guarantee we see a fight for a constitutional amendment to ban gay marriage coming out of the Republicans. Republicans running for president are going to be primaried, and they're going to be forced to take a stand, yes or no, in favor of gay marriage. And if this was in Congress, I mean, I think it's an institutional difference. They went to court. They won in court. They went to Congress. This would not turn out the same way.
Do you think Republicans are happy by this privately, that they won't have to fight on the campaign trail?
When this issue was brought up before the legislature in New York, if at that time it was put before the voters, it wouldn't have passed. That's exactly what you're saying. If you look at the numbers in this state, what the polling was saying back then, the voters were split.
Would now.
But I'm just saying, back then, they knew they had to bring it up as an organization, as a movement, to the courts and to the legislature.
Let me ask you, politically, we go 3 years from now, Christie, whoever, they're going through the primary gauntlet. Can a Republican say he supports gay marriage and get elected in the primary?
Right now, today, no. 3 years from now, who knows?
I disagree. I absolutely disagree. You know, the Pew Research Center came out with a survey, a study, in May of this year, and they polled people, a lot of people, and they asked them these very questions. And what they found was there was an increasing number of white, older, male Republicans in this country who have changed their hearts and minds on the issue of marriage equality. Now, is it because the political and the personal have intersected? They have children or neighbors or friends or otherwise know gay people who are really terrific people, and they know their partners and they know their families? Maybe. But maybe it is about politics in that they realize this is a social justice issue. And the times have changed.
But there is a huge difference between public opinion and a Republican primary in the middle of the country. And so I have to agree that right now, and it may change by the time 2016 comes around, but right now, you're primaried on that, you're going to lose in many segments of the Republican Party because not everybody's going to go out and vote. They're going to be the hardline Republicans running in that primary, and that's always been the difference.
I got to hit our next break here. Another issue we talked about a lot in the recent months here, and a big vote last night, stop and frisk. Overnight, New York City Council voted on a controversial measure that will essentially police the police here. And the numbers, they look to be veto-proof here, no matter what Bloomberg does. We're going to hear from Republican mayoral candidate Joe Lhota on the other side of the break on what he thinks of the news. Stay with us.